Okay, so this is going to be part 3 of our Rails without magic. So we now have a Rails application that can display all of our students. We can display individual students by ID from the URL. And this morning we just added the ability to create new students by way of a form. So I'm going to close some of the stuff I have open here. And just to quickly review what we had done this morning, we had added these routes to our file. There were these create routes. So we had a pair of routes that dealt with creation, one for actually displaying the form, the other for processing the form. And if we looked at the controller, the two of them look like this. The one to create the form simply needed to create a blank student, hand that off to the associated view in which the form was found. Here it is. It made use of that student variable with our form builder, and then when it posted its data, that went back to this create action, which then pulled in the student parameters, which we whitelisted so as to not allow for a mass assignment attack. And then this was the key bit of logic here that prevented the create action from having to need its own view, because in the happy path, when save works, we redirect to the show view, and in the unhappy path, we rendered the view that was associated with the new action. So we did not need to have a create.html.erb. We either redirected or used the new view to redisplay the form. And so that's what's going on when I click create student with a blank student. I get this error message. There's no actual associated view. It's just using the new view. All right, so let's continue what we were doing, which was trying to implement our various CRUD actions. So we've got the read actions, the create actions. Let's go about creating update actions. So we'll say update routes. And just like create, we're going to want a pair of them. We're going to want one to display the edit form and one that the form can post to in order to actually perform the updating. And so the one to display a form is going to be a GET request. And it's going to be similar to our show in that it's a member route, because if we want to edit a student, we need to edit a particular student by ID. And so we're going to have student/ID/edit be the URL for editing a student. So if we wanted to edit student with a primary key of 1, we would go to it'll be students, plural, student/1/edit to get the form to edit that particular student. If we wanted to edit student with a primary key of 99, we would go to /students/99/edit. And so when a URL matches this pattern, we are wanting to load up the students controllers edit action. I'm going to say this is going to be called edit student. And just like with the show route, I want a regular expression constraint on the ID such that the ID is one or more numeric digit, just to prevent a certain class of errors where you could potentially put something non-numeric in for the ID. We just don't want those to even match. So if we put students something else /edit, that won't match. That's good. So that's the route we need. We're also going to need a route that this can post to, but we'll deal with this one first. We'll actually go and create the associated view and the associated action. And so I will create the associated action right here. I will call it edit. And when we wanted to load up the form and create a new student, we created a @student variable and we just set it to student.new. when we want to locate a particular student, we want to do the same thing that is done on line 8 here, which is how we loaded up a particular student for the show, is that we want to find a student by ID. So we can just copy that line and put it down in here.
Can we not just make a call to that? Sorry, could we just not make a call? Could we make a call to the...
To show?
Yeah.
No, but you've given me a good idea. So the reason we can't make a call to show is that we don't want, when we create these things as actions, we don't want to really think of them as your standard kind of methods. They should only ever be called by the Rails routing mechanism. That said, now that we have some repetition in our code, down below in the private section, we could make a method called find student, and that could take this. Oops. And now in both the edit and the show, we could call find student. So find student can go there, it's just a method call now. Same thing here, edit is going to find student, that's just a method call now. And here we have that find student method, which is a private method which we can treat as a method. So that's worthwhile. Here, let me just kill my Outlook here. If we were quickly just to look at how scaffolding handles this, it handles it a little bit differently. And so if I looked at a Rails application that had been scaffolded, we would see that any of the member routes, like show and edit, they're actually just straight up blank.
Yeah.
And that's because they have this down below, this set product that sets that instance variable, and it gets called by way of this before action. And so a little bit too magical for our needs at this point. The before action, what it does is it'll call this set product only on the show, edit, the update, and destroy. We're going to be a little bit more explicit because we're trying to be. So we'll use this find student method. And maybe that could be better named. It could be find student by ID or something like that, but I think this will do for now. So let's make sure, one, that we didn't break the show that we just refactored, and two, that the edit link is going to start working. So if we go to like student/1, the show should still work, and it does. We still get the right student. And I said that the new route that we created should look like this: students/some ID/edit. That is all well and good until it reaches the point where it realizes it doesn't have the view that we need. So it says student controller edit is missing a template for this request. Okay, that's because we don't have the thing that's going to be automatically loaded here. Automatically loads the associated view app views students edit.html.erb. We don't have that yet. We have to go get it. App views students. We need a edit.html.erb. And in that edit is going to be almost exactly what's inside of the new. In fact, everything other than that top header is going to be the same. So if I copy everything from the new and paste it, oops, I pasted the wrong stuff. Let me just go and copy all of this into here. And then with an H2, I would say like edit student at the top. That should get us to a point where we have this edit form, and the form should actually display within the input, the name input, the name of the student being edited. And so going to my /student/1/edit, that's Wally Glutton. So we should get a form where the name Wally Glutton is already in there. If I go to student/2/edit, that's Daisy Glutton. And so we should get a form with Daisy's name right in there. Notice, even though we copied and pasted this form, the button is aware of the fact that it's being used in a different context. So there is magical stuff still happening. At a certain point, there's like, we just can't prevent Rails from doing some magic, right? So the form is exactly identical. I didn't change the form at all. But when the form is used in the context of a new, it says create student. When the form is used in the context of an edit, it says update student. And that's because form 4 is the thing building the submit button, and form 4 can look at this @student variable and know if it is a already persisted object from the database or if it's a brand new thing. Right? All it really needs to look at is the ID of the object. If the ID is nil, it's brand new, and so it can have the submit button say create, and if the ID is set, it can make the assumption that we're updating. Okay, well that's all well and good. When this gets posted, something has to exist to receive that post. So if I wanted to change Wally's name to Walter, and I wanted to be able to click update, that needs to post somewhere, but we get a routing error. And what it tells us is it says no route matches patch/students/1. If we look at our various routes, you can see that's true. We don't have any of our routes that deal with the patch HTTP verb, and we need to create one. So back in our routing file, I'm going to create a route that matches a patch request, and it's going to be a patch request that again needs to be a member route because we need to know which student we are receiving information about, which student we are trying to update. And so student/ID is going to be the URL. So just like with our create, where we had a URL/students that was used twice in our routes, one in the context of a get and the other in the context of a post, we now have another URL, which is /student/ID. When you do a get request to that URL, it's the show page. When you do a patch request to that URL, it's an update. So again, we're working with all the HTTP verbs that actually exist. We want, in this case, the routing to go to the students update action, which we haven't yet actually made. And that's it. So now we need to make that action, but we have at least a route for it now. So both the create and the updates come in these pairs, one for the form, the other to actually process the form. So in the controller, we now need to make that route. Def update. A couple things need to happen here. We need to fetch the student object that is being updated. So we can again make use of this find student method. The find student method is going to be used inside of all of our member routes, all of our routes that have IDs in them. And so again, if you look at the routing file, the show route, the edit route, the update route, they all have IDs in them. They're all member routes. And so all of them can make use of this find student. Once we have access to this @student variable, now we can perform the update. So I can say, I think I can say something like this. If, I'm not exactly sure which one I should be testing. Again, what I will do is quickly just refer to the non-scaffolded version and defer to how scaffolding handled this. Oh yeah, it's straight up update. So I'm going to say if at student.update. When we built the create method, we built a new student with the student params, and that was this whitelisted params hash. We're going to use the same thing here. So if we can update a student with the student params, this update command is sort of the same as if you went and set all the properties and called save. So it's going to return true or false based on validations. And so just like with the create action, we're going to have two paths: if the save or update worked, or if it didn't, if validations failed. So if validations pass, then we simply need to redirect to the student show page. If it didn't work out, if the validations fail, what do we need to do in that case? Well, again, we don't have a view associated with this update action, or we don't need one. We can simply reuse the view associated with the edit. So I can render the edit view. To show the form again. And it'll also display error messages. Display validation errors. And so no view associated with this action. We either redirect or render. So there's no update.html.erb. So one of the reasons why I have you as a class work on active record before working on Rails is that everything we are doing within this controller is just working with active record. So it's all the things that you will have done manually before, like fetching collections, finding individual students, creating blank student objects, saving with validations, finding students, updating. It's like all of the basic active record stuff. Mixed into it is some more Railsy stuff like redirecting and rendering and dealing with that params hash. So it's a little bit of a mixture of the two. So let's go see if this update actually worked. The path again is that when we go to the edit form, we'll load up the student in question. The student's data will be displayed within the form. When that form gets submitted, it's going to go and make a patch request to /student/ the ID of the student being edited. That will trigger the update action, at which point the update action will find the student object that needs to be updated, pass in the whitelisted parameters, and either redirect back to the show view of the newly updated student or re-render the edit form. What that should look like over here is if I just reload this here. We have this student named Wally Glutton. If I want to change the student to Walter S. Glutton, I can click Update Student. It worked. I got redirected back to that particular student's show page. You can see the updated name is in place. You can go back to all students. There's the updated name. And if I go to a particular student with /ID/edit and I fail validations, like for example, I remove the name completely and try to update that student, I get my validation error saying that the name cannot be blank. So we've sort of replicated what we were doing with create with a little bit of a twist in that we're now working with an existing student object. we now have some major repetition in our code, right? We have the edit view and the and the new view, and if I was to switch back and forth between the two of them, they are absolutely identical other than this top H2. So again, that's the job of a partial. In the first class, we made a partial for the student. That was a partial for a particular active record object. This is not for a particular active record object per se. It is just for the form itself. And so what I should be able to do is I should be able to go and create a new file here, which I will call _form. The underscore means it's a partial. .html.erb. I can bring that into my editor. In the new view, I can just delete the whole form. And in the edit view, what I can do is I can cut the form and paste it into that form partial. Don't need to modify it in any way. And then in both of those views, all I need to do is render that partial. So I can say render partial form. That's in the edit. Same thing inside of the new. Echo out render partial form. So that duplication has been taken out of edit, taken out of new, shuffled off into a partial, and that partial is now being rendered by the two different places where that form is being used, and the form itself is sitting in the partial. Let's make sure that all still works. So if I go to student/new, there's my form. Validations are still working. I can actually still create students. If I go to edit a student, that seems to be still working. Let's see if the update still works, and it does. And so again, a nice little use of a partial in that as we add to students, as we add properties to students, it's going to be a little bit nicer to have a single place to modify the form rather than always having to remember to edit the form in both of those two locations. It's not the biggest deal, but it'll save us a little bit in terms of maintenance. How does that sit with everybody? Do you need to see any of my code?
Yeah, no, I'm a little bit behind.
Okay.
So I'm gonna stop coding.
Okay. Let me just do one thing here. I will push this all up to Git so that I've captured my changes. Git add dot. I go down, I guess. Git status. Git add dot. Git commit. Implemented the student edit and student update. Is there anything that's not clear at this point? Alex?
Oh, I was, yeah, I was just not trying to pull his version and said it's already up to date.
I can also
See if
push this.
it's still not.
So now I've pushed my code up to GitHub if you're trying to pull it from there. There are a few things missing from my application. Right now, if I want to edit a student, I have to manually type in the right route into the URL. That doesn't seem great. And I also can't delete yet. But let's take each one of those things at a time. It would be nice to be able to say have beside each one of the students' names a link to edit that student. The student names are displayed as part of the student partial. And so I can go to my Views Students folder and grab that partial. And within there, maybe I'll do it within the same paragraph tag. Just a dash. I want to have a link to the word edit, and then where do I want to link to? In the routing file, we named the edit route edit student. So it's the edit student path that I wish to use. But just like when we needed to link to the show route, I need to tell link to which student I actually wish to edit, because the route requires an ID. You need to know a member student in which to edit. And so I pass the student object to that. So now I'm saying link to, the text of the link will be edit, and then where do I want to link to? Well, I want to link to the edit student path for this particular student, whichever student is being rendered by this partial. And so now on show pages and on the index page, both of those should now have a edit link beside the student's name that links to the edit form for the particular student. So if I save that, I can reload here. There's all my edit links. If I go to a particular student, there's edit links there as well. That takes me to the edit form. Should be able to update that student, have it go back over here. So the edit functionality was just a matter of using my named route to link to a route that I had already defined. So the functionality was there, we just weren't linking to it. So linking to edit, and then that's the student we wish to edit, which will trigger this route right here. And we only have one final verb to deal with, which is delete. We want to be able to delete a particular student. There is an HTTP verb for that, just like there are for most of our CRUD things, which is delete. And deletion is also a member action. We need to delete a particular student, not just, a student at random. We need to delete a particular student by ID. And so the URL needs to be, like all the other member actions, needs to involve an ID. It's going to route to students delete, which I have not yet written. It's not an action that yet exists. I can give it an as, I can call it like delete student. And just like my other member routes, I can constrain it with a regular expression. So I can put a comment here, delete route. And here I only need a single route. With create and update, I needed pairs for both of them because there needed to be a form to display to perform the actual, allow the user to put in information about the student being created or the student being updated. But with delete, I just need to be able to receive a delete request by way of HTTP delete to a particular URL, and then I need to go about deleting that student. So there's two things I need to do now. One, I need to go into the student's controller and create this delete action. And two, I need to actually create a way for the end users to be able to trigger this route. which is going to be a little bit, that's going to be the sort of the strange part of things. Creating the action itself shouldn't be that odd. It's just yet another member route. So it's the action's going to need to go and fetch the student in question and then call destroy on that object. Student will go away. So I can go and create that action, create it right here. Call it delete. Maybe it should be called destroy. I wonder what they call it in the scaffolded views. In the scaffolded views, it's called destroy. Okay, well, I'll follow their conventions. I'll call it destroy, which means I need to edit my routes and call that destroy as well. I'll still call it delete. There.
Should you name it? Oh. Oh, okay, you're calling it destroy.
I'm calling destroy. I still haven't decided if I need a name on it yet or what that name should be. I'll leave it with delete, or maybe I'll just make it destroy so that everything matches. I don't know yet if I'm going to need this name or not. We'll see in a moment. So over here, it's a member route, so the first thing it needs to do is what all of our member routes needed to do. The show went and found the student using our find student method. The edit found the student by way of our find student method. The update found the student by way of our find student method. So destroy needs to do the same thing. Once the student is found, that student can be destroyed. And then I can redirect to, and then maybe, like, where do I want to redirect to in this case? Maybe back to that index view, right, to the student's path. Again, I'm just going to quickly check the scaffolded version of the code to see if I'm following the conventions that would have been used there. Oh, they use slightly different conventions. So in the scaffolded code, they have it redirect to, instead of students underscore path, students underscore URL, which is just another helper, but it's going to be the fully qualified URL rather than the relative path. So when destroy is called, we find the student. We find the student specifically by ID, the ID coming to us by way of the URL route. Then we destroy that student. We don't need to worry about whether or not the student actually exists in the database, because if the student did not exist in the database, an exception would have been thrown at the find student level. So this call to find student for a particular ID, if we tried to find, for example, ID 99, and that student wasn't in the database, that would throw an exception, which would then, stop the execution of our code. So we don't need to worry about, oh, is this thing nil? An exception would have been thrown. So we would not have reached the destroy command. So we'll only get to line 46 if we have found a student object, called destroy in it, that will run the SQL deletion, and then we redirect to the student's URL, which is that /student. So /students. So redirects to the student's index page. Now I can't really easily test this, because the only way to test this is to be able to generate a HTTP delete request to my server. And now this is the part where I tell you that our browsers actually only support gets and posts. Browsers do not have the ability to send puts or patches or deletes. And you might say, well, how is that possible? You've already been using a patch when you did the update. So the form, the update form itself, must have in some way have sent a patch to the server. And this is where Rails actually intervenes on our behalf. Browsers can only do get and post at all. That's all they know how to do. Servers know how to speak the full rest of the HTTP language, as do other HTTP clients, but browsers do not. So let's take just a bit of a diversion and go back over to the update and see what the heck is actually going on there. If I go to edit a particular student, and I view source and I look at this form, this is the edit form. This is the form that's supposed to be sending a patch request to /student/SumID to trigger the update. And everything seems to have been working, so that has been happening. If we look in this form though, here is the form itself, and right within the form itself, the method is set to post. So it really is just posting. But Rails is faking things out. There's a hidden input inside of the form with a name of _method and a value of patch. So that's just Rails pretending to do a patch. Now, why would Rails go to all of this extent just to fake out verbs that don't actually exist inside of HTTP? The main reason is that Rails is often used as an API. And when we build a web-based API, it's not just browsers that are going to communicate with that API. It'll actually be like HTTP clients, and the clients themselves do support all the methods. So Rails is just making it so that if you interact with Rails as an API, it works as you would expect. It supports all of the proper verbs. But rather than have it work in two different ways, one way for the browser and another way for clients, and having to route differently for each, it just fakes out the missing verbs within the browser for us. So it's a bit of a weird thing, but it all happens behind the scenes, and we don't really need to see that. And again, this is magic. This is Rails magic, but it's sort of unavoidable magic. There's nothing I can do to make this magic go away. Just the fact that Rails injects this hidden input into our edit form that says, no, this is really should be treated as a patch. So how do we do the same for delete? Like, how do I make a button or a link in Rails fake out a delete request? Well, I will show you how to do that. If we go back to that student partial, it might be nice to also have a delete link. So I'm going to have a link to here that says delete. And it needs to, what do I want to delete? Well, I want to delete the particular student. Oh, that's why I don't need the path. So this is not going to have a name. The reason it's not going to have a name is because I already have a name for the route that I want to make use of. I want to make use of /student/ID, which is just the student path. That's from show. But I want it to respond on a different verb. So I want to delete the student in question. So I'm going to go to student path student. This on its own, of course, is not going to delete the student. It's just going to show the student. This is the same thing we did right here to have a link to the show action. So if I go back to my browser and load this up, there will be a link that says delete, but clicking on it will simply just show the student. It won't do what we want it to do. So I'll show you that in action. Over here, go back to my, they each have a delete link beside them, but if I click on that link, all it does is go to the show. Because all that happens is a get request to /student/SumID is triggered, and we have a route for that. A get request to /student/ID is show. What we can do though is inside of link to, we can specify that the method to use is delete. And that's how we get Rails to fake out delete requests in the context of a link. So this link, which previously just showed the student by linking to the student path, I can say no, now instead of using a get request to that path, use a delete request. Now the proper route will be triggered. I will delete the student in question. So again, things are getting, it's like a little bit magical here. It shouldn't be destroy because we're targeting the HTTP verb, and so that's this right here. But very good question. We did call the action destroy. Jenna?
Well, first of all, you called the method in the second and third paragraph delete. That should be changed. Like the collector?
Yep.
That one, that method called.
Yes. And so that needs to be
Your answer for her?
that. No, different. So yeah, this needs to be delete because this is which verb should be used, which HTTP verb to use.
So then I'm confused with the link too, because in the top one says edit, which is the name of the
Yes.
method, and the second one says delete, which is the name of the verb.
Yes, and so the difference is, yeah, see, it does get a little tricky here. The difference is the path here is the as. So when I'm linking to the edit student path, that's coming to us by way of the name of the route, which is defined with the as parameter. So we've named this link right here, edit student. So when we want to link to it, we go to the edit student path. But when we want to have Rails fake out a delete request, that's when we use the HTTP verb name, delete. And so we say that the method to use when the user clicks this button, the HTTP method to use is delete. Does that make more sense? Okay, so yeah, this is the named route compared to this is the HTTP verb to use when this link is clicked. The default is just to use GET requests. So all regular links typically use GET requests. In this case, a delete request will be used instead. It's going to go to the student path, which is /student/SomeID. That will then trigger a delete request to /student/SomeID. We'll trigger the destroy method and that. And so here I find myself a little bit wanting to go against Rails conventions. It would seem to me that it would actually make more sense to call this delete. It doesn't matter, it's just the name of the thing, but it seems like it's a bit strange that it's different than the verb in question. But I guess this is called update and this is called batch, so they don't really match there either. Let me just make sure this actually works and then we can chat a little bit more about it. So here is my list of all students. Let's see, I want to delete the student called new student. Click this. Didn't work. I think I need to reload this whole page. Do you work now? No. It worked for you, but not for me. Oh, and I didn't actually save the view that I was working on. There you go. Okay, so let me go back to my students and delete. And it says no route matches delete /student5. Did I not save my routing yet? Delete students ID. But I did save that, students/ID. So Charmy, it's working for you?
Yeah, I just do want to check.
No, I just don't know why. Is it any different than what I've done?
Okay, so
Delete student/ID, student destroy.
I don't have that.
Oh, I wonder if that constraint is making it.
Because it would be passing that ID again to itself. And
It will be.
it's not finding it.
Let's see if that solves my problem. Okay, delete the student.
Because it's passing itself.
Okay, well there you go. So the constraint does not go there, and things are working in that context method of delete. Now, sometimes it's handy to give your users the option to confirm whether or not they actually want to delete something. In this case, the moment I press delete, it just disappears. It would be nice to say, are you sure you wish to delete? And that we typically do with JavaScript. In Rails, what we do is we say data, and then in a hash, we say confirm, are you sure you want to delete this student? or whatever kind of messaging we wish to use. What data does is if we go and view source, which I'll get us to do in a moment, is it goes and it uses a data attribute on the link, and well, here maybe I'll go show us. So we needed a comma after the method delete, and data, colon, and then this whole big hash here that just has a single key value pair, confirm, and then the string. If I go into the browser, what I'll do first is I'll view source, and I'll see the actual link that is being built. So I'll go into here, reload this, and view source. You can see on each one of these delete links, there's a few things that exists. It's an A with an href. Plain old A's with hrefs are just GET requests. They're just our standard links. But there's some extra stuff here. There's this data-method equals delete. And there's also this data-confirm equals are you sure you want to delete the student? And then there's this rel no follow. Rel no follow is sort of for, it's a clue to things like Googlebot. Like, don't bother following this URL. This is not a URL that you should try to follow when spider crawling the web. So that's just a hint to search engines. Data dash is a way to add attributes to HTML elements that you want to interact with JavaScript. And so there's JavaScript that runs just default as part of Rails. And there are a number of things that this JavaScript looks for. In particular, it looks for links that have data methods or data confirms. If it finds a link that has a data method, when you click on that link, it actually prevents the link from being sent and then uses JavaScript to actually send the delete request. Because although browsers can't do the full suite of HTTP verbs, JavaScript can. So JavaScript's embedded in the browsers. You can't do the full suite of verbs just with HTML itself, but with JavaScript you can. So that's how Rails gets around this. One of the things that means, though, is that Rails applications need JavaScript enabled in the browser to work. Like if I disabled JavaScript in my browser, this would not work anymore. And same this data confirm, there's JavaScript that will run on the page, and it will look for any links that have a data confirm, and it will inject a click handler on that link to prompt the user, are you sure? And it will then only at that point allow the link to be clicked. At which point JavaScript will again come in and say, no, you're not actually a link, I'll handle this for you. So let's go over and look at that in action now. If I reload this page, I click delete, I get this prompt, are you sure you want to delete the student? If I hit cancel, the student is not deleted. If I click OK, the student is deleted. And I should again be able to watch that in the network tab here to sort of see what's happening. And so if I load the page up in the network tab, we see a bunch of GET requests. If I then click this delete and click OK, well, that was hard to see. Oh, there it is. That actually triggered, oh, I lied to you all. And here's why I say I lied to you all. It actually did, so maybe JavaScript can't do all the verbs, because it actually did do a post request, and it probably did that same kind of fake out. So if we look at the request data that was sent with the post, yeah, it did the underscore method delete fake out that the other form did. So the browser and JavaScript can't speak all the verbs. It's just that the link gets hijacked by JavaScript and the delete request is just sent along for the ride with the form. So things were fairly uncomplex until this last little bit here. Things got more magical than I would like, but that's about as unmagical as I can make things in terms of building things without magic. What questions do you have at this point about anything that I did today?
I to be honest, a lot of this doesn't make sense to me right now.
Yep.
Until I sit down and start trying to figure it out for myself.
Fair enough.
I can't even tell you what I don't know.
Okay.
Because I don't know what I don't know.
So you're at the don't know what you don't know stage,
Yeah.
which is okay. I mean, it's very easy for me to get up and show you all this stuff because I learned all this stuff and I went through that don't know what I don't know phase. And I'll tell you, when I was first learning Rails, I was learning it to teach this course.
Yeah.
And it was like I was given like May, June time. I was told I was going to teach the course in the fall, and it was during May, June that I had to learn all of Rails. It was really confusing, especially because like there wasn't a lot of resources at the time for learning Rails. It was just sort of me Googling. Stack Overflow wasn't even that strong at the time, so it was just a whole lot of confusion. I eventually learned it. There was a few good books that helped along the way. Let's take a little bit of a break, and then we'll come back and we'll add a little bit more to what we've been doing. Okay, so we've done a few things, and we now have a CRUD app with the ability to create, update, and delete students, but we've sort of intermingled what's like front-end activity and back-end activity. Right now this is like what an admin should be allowed access to, but not necessarily if this was like also had a forward-facing component to it. I wouldn't want everyone to be able to edit or delete these individual students. And so what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to probably create a branch into which I can remove some of this admin functionality and then bring in a gem which will build an administrative backend for me that'll have a username and password, or multiple username and passwords will be completely separate, and then the front end of my application will simply just be for listing information about students. So I will here create a branch to work on, git checkout -b, I'll call it explore active admin. Git branch. Oh, that's weird. It put my branch in quotes, like the actual name of the branch is in quotes. I don't want that.
You had 2 quotes in there.
It quoted it.
I need to put the quotes around.
It's like you don't need the quotes around it. That's what it is. So now I don't want that extra quoted one. I want to git branch -d and delete that weird one. Okay. That's fine. Okay, so I will just make a better branch. Like that. So now I have this weird branch which I won't use, and this one that I actually am going to use that I am now switched to. So I can feel free to make experimental changes within this branch, blow away huge portions of my application just to try something out, and I don't have to worry about it changing the master branch. So what that means is I really just want the student controller to have forward-facing stuff, index and show only. So as such, I will go ahead and delete huge swaths of what was in my student controller. I'm also going to go to the config routing file and remove all of the routes that are no longer important. And there's a few things in the views that I would need to do. I would need to delete some of those views. I won't bother going in and deleting them. There's nothing that's going to make use of them. But in my student partial, the whole idea of editing or deleting a student goes away. So now we go back to my application. I probably need to get rid of that create. Yeah, that's in the index. we simply have this application back to where we started in part 1, where it's simply informational only. I have the ability to list students or individual student records, and that's it. I will close a few of these browser tabs here, and I will do a search for something called active, not just active, but active admin. I'm going to open up the active admin homepage as well as their GitHub repository. And what active admin is it's an administration framework for business critical Ruby on Rails applications. What that means is it can build a whole backend for you for every single one of your models. We only have one model, but any number of models that we had, it would create a whole backend for us with the ability to do CRUD tasks on those models, also with the ability to do advanced searching or filtering. It's a very, very nice system to build all the things that you would need in a backend without actually having to build them yourself. It also has logins built into it, so it handles users with encrypted passwords. It just deals with it all. The setup is a little bit difficult, so I'll step you through it. For most of this, I would just recommend just watching me because it's finicky. A lot of things will sort of break along the way, and then we'll just get them working. So there's a few things we need to know. They're working on version 1 of Active Admin, so everything up to this point has been sort of pre-1.0 release. The version that's up on Ruby gems, if we were just to put in our gem file that we wanted the Active Admin gem, it would pull in an old version of it. And so they're telling us here, the wording is tracking master. What they mean is I can just put into my gem file, which is the file that Bundler uses to figure out all the libraries my Rails application should use. I can put in active admin and I can tell it to source it from the code that's up on the master repo for GitHub for active admin. So like as they are actively making changes to active admin, the most recent version is up on the GitHub repository. That's what I want to use for my project. So it's just sort of use the bleeding edge active admin. And then there's this extra little bit of information here saying for Rails 5, you have to add this extra line to your gem file. So we haven't really used the gem file as of yet, so let's go take a look at it. Close these other things down for now. Here's this gem file. This is the file into which all of the libraries that make up a Rails application are listed, and when you first install Rails, it runs Bundler. Bundler looks at this gem file and it goes and makes sure that we have the latest version or the specified version of all of these gems. And you can have gems that are only needed for, say, development or testing, or for development, or for specific platforms. There's all sorts of ways you can sort of quantify which gems you want. And if I want to bring in a gem, the easiest way to do it is just to specify that gem. I want the active admin gem. But as I said, we want to make use of the most recent version of the active admin gem, the one that's up on GitHub. So I'm going to specify that, the name of the gem and its source. And then they have specified here to me that for Rails 5 to work, I have to pull in another gem. The reason this is that active admin depends on another gem called inherited resources, but by default, it'll just pull in the most recent one that's up on Ruby gems. And in this case, we need to, again, pull in the most recent version of the gem that's up on GitHub. And then lastly, because we want active admin to give us usernames and passwords, we need to pull in a third gem. Without this gem, active admin will defer to you to handle usernames and passwords. We want it to handle the usernames and passwords for us. So there's a gem called, I never know how to pronounce this, if this should be devise or device. I call it devise. Seems about right? Yeah. It's the problem with the internet. There's all these words that I've only ever read. And then when I say them aloud, sometimes people laugh.
Well, if there was a C, you'd say device.
Yeah. But I've heard people like on podcasts call it device. I'm like, well, is it supposed to be pronounced that way?
Yeah.
I think they're wrong. Yeah. Let's just draw the line in the sand right here. So yeah, we need those 3 lines. Just putting those into our gem file doesn't actually do anything. We have to go and rerun Bundler. And so we run this bundle command, and we say bundle install, and bundler will now look at the gem file to see if there's any new gems that are mentioned in it. And there's 3 of them specifically. And it should go install those gems and any gems that they themselves depend upon. And so there you go. What you didn't get to see was that the first time I ran this myself, it had to go pull in different gems. Those have already been brought into my system, but there's new gems that are sort of like sub-dependencies. This thing called Formtastic and this thing called Kaminari. They are all the things that ActiveAdmin, Inherent, and Resource and Devise depend upon. So every time you add a gem to a Rails project, just know that you're usually not just bringing in one gem, you're bringing in a suite of gems because of the dependencies. And it's not always the safest thing to, I've looked at a lot of people's gem files over the years, and they get pretty unwieldy. It's like people making use of like hundreds of gems, and then those gems must also be pulling in lots of different gems. You're betting a lot on the open source community when you start relying on a lot of gems. That said, we're going to rely on some. Did you have a question?
Oh, why does it, like, I'm following you only, I did everything step by step, but why does it say system cannot find the path specified when I did bundle install?
Oh, that might be a configuration issue of the Rails installer version of Bundler. I can help you with that after the demo, because there might just be something that's a little bit broken with your install. Because it might not have pulled in the gems properly. So now that I've done this, I've got those gems in there. I can go back to my ActiveAdmin page and I can go to their documentation section, and they sort of tell me what I need to do. The first thing I need to do is a new generator has been added to Rails. So I can run Rails generate or Rails G ActiveAdmin install. And so I'm going to do that. Rails G ActiveAdmin install. That's going to create a few new tables for me. There's going to be an admin users table that's going to be created. That is going to be for administrative users. There's also a comments table that's added. That's so that you can actually comment on things that are happening in the admin dashboards. If you're working on a large team, that would be helpful. There's some documentation that sort of comes out here telling you things you might need to do. For whatever reason, you need to have a route mapped in your config file for ActiveAdmin to work. We already set that up earlier today. Some migrations have been created. That's to create the tables. So now I need to run those migrations. So I'll do my Rails db:/migrate. That should bring the required tables into existence. And then there is a command to generate new ActiveAdmin resources. And this is how ActiveAdmin is going to know which of your models you want to be able to administrate.
One thing they don't mention in there
Yep.
is you have to do a Rails DB seed if you want to get the first admin user to be added to it.
Oh, and I ran into that today when I was playing around with it, and I just went and manually added that user because I didn't know why it didn't exist. So they put a seed file into the folder, do they?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just go and see that. So DB seeds. I wonder if they just drop it into the... Okay, interesting. So this seeds file is like, if you want your application to, if you want your application database to contain data when it first is created, someone clones your repo for the very first time, you can put any kind of command into the seed folder or into the seed file that will sort of create stuff for you in your database so that someone can clone your application, seed the database, and have it in sort of an initial state. So I need to do a Rails DB seed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that will give me, if we look at the seed file, a user named admin@example.com with a password of password. It's handy. It gives me the ability to actually log in to ActiveAdmin. So we can run that. Wait a little bit. hopefully that worked. I can actually check if it worked. I can run Rails console, and I can go and look at the contents of the admin users table by way of the admin users model that ActiveAdmin has added for me. So why don't we do just that? So I'll run my Rails console. Admin user.count. There is a single admin user in there, and if I look at that single admin user, there, it actually did create it. There it is. There's the email address. Okay. And if we were to look at the password, if I like say a equals admin user dot first a dot password, oh, that's just a hidden property of it. So we can only set the password from the outside world. We can't get it. Well, that seems decent. Okay. Over here, we should now be able to go to /admin and weird. Yeah, I didn't have to today though. But look, if you look here, my whole routing file is empty. It says I don't have any routes defined. So let me just see if, did I do anything weird to my routing file? Did ActiveAdmin do anything weird to my routing file? Well, ActiveAdmin put some stuff in my routing file for me. It put in its routes and device routes. Maybe I will restart my server. There are very few instances these days when you need to restart the Rails server. This might be one of them. And we'll let it boot back up. And back over here for the admin page. Come on, ActiveAdmin. I want to log into you. And so it looks like it actually did interpret the route properly. So is it just... It's there. Ah, there you go. I got this fancy login screen. I know my user is admin@example.com with a password of password. I'm in this admin dashboard. I can go in, I can see like my admin users. I could create new admin users at this point. So I could, I could make a account for myself. I could put in a password to that account and create that user. Password is encrypted in the backend, which is nice, so it's done that work for me. I can now probably go and delete the pre-created one and just log in with a new one. Right now I have no ability to edit products at this point, but another command later and we should be able to. So we can do this Rails generate ActiveAdmin resource. So exit from here, Rails generate ActiveAdmin resource. What do I want? I want the student. And then there's just one more level of whitelisting that we have to handle because ActiveAdmin is also susceptible to that mass assignment that we talked about today. So we got to handle that in the ActiveAdmin file that it creates inside of our app admin folder. So we have an app admin folder. There is their student within there. And all we need to do is it gives us a little bit of documentation here in terms of a comment. We need to say permit params, and we only have one parameter that we need to be changed by the outside world, which is the name param. And indent you. Okay. Save. We should be good to go, back over at my admin panel here, students now shows up. And there are my students. I can see the information about them. I can edit them. My validations are taken into account. Tells me it can't be blank. I can create new students. An admin student. Create that student. There it is. I could edit that student. I could delete a student from this list here as well. So all of the things that we implemented today by hand, ActiveAdmin just builds them for us. So release the magic again. I do really like these kind of administrative dashboards. They've helped me build websites really crazy quickly. And so like on early versions of winnipegelection.ca and manitobelection.ca, our most recent versions of these websites are now written in WordPress with WordPress plugins, but the first few versions of them were Rails applications. And I'm the sole coder for our organization, and I was able to build the first version of winnipegelected.ca in a week, mainly because I had things like ActiveAdmin, right? So instead of having to go and build all of the CRUD scaffolding, I could go and worry more about the schema that I was dealing with. Oh, I have candidates, and those candidates are associated with various constituencies and things like that. So I could model things out, and once I had all the relationships figured out, I just created my tables, plugged in ActiveAdmin, and I got this whole administrative database backend for free. Then I could just worry about the front end, the styling, all the other kind of stuff. So I don't think I could have built these websites and repeatedly built these websites. I built them, a new version of them for every single election, just because Rails was changing, so I would just try it out with the latest version of Rails. I couldn't have done it without Rails and some of the admin resources that are available. So they are helpful. As we add to student, as we start to expand what it means to be a student, we're going to have more parameters. So a student might eventually have an email address associated with them. I'm going to have to make changes in various locations. You know, inside of my student partial, I will have to start outputting information about the extra things that have to do with the student, but also inside of this ActiveAdmin file, I will have to add any new parameters here so that ActiveAdmin is given permission to actually edit and create students with those parameters. That said, I do recommend using some form of admin dashboard gem for your project, just to save yourself the work of doing all that back-end administrative stuff for every one of your, for every single one of your models. It becomes really incredibly powerful when you have models with associations. So imagine if, for example, this application got more complicated to the point where there were courses and students that belonged to courses. Or maybe that's not, that's a many-to-many. That's a bit more complicated. Maybe we're categorizing students. So students were in particular programs. So a student might be in BIT or IBIT. ActiveAdmin even deals with those in a really special way, and it does so magically. So if there was an association, if there was a, say a programs table that had a association with students, like a student could belong to a program and a program has many students, just that association alone would be enough for there to be a drop down when creating and editing students where I could pick from all the possible programs, and it would just be there automatically. It would handle the association by foreign keys. It is a really, really powerful way of dealing with complex relationships without having to write all of the code associated with it. Now there's more than just ActiveAdmin. And so if we went to like a website like Awesome Ruby, which sort of lists all the sort of the great Ruby libraries, there's a few of them. Admin interface. ActiveAdmin is but one of the available ones. I recommend it mainly because it's the one that I have experience with. I have heard good things about Rails admin, in that it doesn't look as pretty as active admin, but when you start configuring active admin, there's a whole other world of magic that you have to absorb, because active admin does things that are slightly different from the Rails way of doing things, whereas Rails admin is not as much magic behind the scenes. This is a newer one. I don't know if it's under active development or not, but I've heard good things about it, but it may be stalled at this point. So my recommendation right now is to use ActiveAdmin, but if you want to try out some of the others, you can always try them out. So I think that's where we're going to leave things for today. I'm not going to put the ActiveAdmin stuff up on GitHub. I'll just leave the sort of the stuff that we coded ourselves up on GitHub, and the ActiveAdmin stuff will just be in the video itself, but I won't push that to the repository. So I will stop this.